certainly I have a biological imperative. I have a biological need for food to create energy. Yes, that is true. But when is that the case versus a psychological desire for pleasure with food? And really being able to feel that sense of ghrelin, that sense of hunger, um, arise within me and then witness its provenance, basically. Was it coming from a biological need, or was it coming from some sort of psychological need for comfort or pleasure? And the more I could actually train myself to witness that feeling, the more I could delineate between the two and say, okay, actually now I really need to go get like a handful of walnuts or something because I'm feeling low. I need some energy.
So let's start with your health journey. We are in this era of agency where we have the ability to change our destiny and change our health outcomes. And your story is one of just that. So what happened to your metabolic health and your health journey?
I was one of those people that blamed genetics for poor metabolism. I think, that's a common trope, where people just say, well, I just have poor metabolism and, that's the way I was born. And, here I am, carrying extra weight, but, also not feeling great and suffering from all of the knock on impacts of what I learned was insulin resistance, et cetera. And, as you say, I've been immersed in the wellness industry for a long time. Now, that doesn't always ensure that you are also well, because, they say wisdom is taking your own advice. Well, it took me a long time to get around to that. But, yeah, I always felt as though I was eating a healthy diet. I was getting regular exercise, but I was, as you say, not experiencing optimal health. I had chronic fatigue, brain fog. I got COVID pretty severely early on, and that kind of set off this trophic cascade where over about a year and a half, I was getting um, sick on a recurring basis. Clearly, my immune system had been degraded. And I really had to take, a harder look at my own health. I just turned 52. So, that's just orbits around the sun and that's chronological age. And, I began to get more focused on health span or bio age, if you will. And, and it started very much as a product of like how I was feeling. And then it became a more kind of intellectual process. So, and I'll also say I was carrying around not like a tremendous amount of excess weight, but typical kind of apple shape, visceral fat, kind of around the middle of my body. Certainly could, wear it respectfully, but but there it was, and I was always, throughout my entire life, I was a chubby kid, and I've always had, my internal battles with weight, and so yeah, I became really interested in blood sugar, and I got a CGM, I got a levels, and I got the levels app, and lo and behold, I was pre-diabetic. I was running fasting glucose levels of 115 to 120 milligrams per deciliter, and postprandial spikes were like off the charts, like 200 plus on a consistent basis. And then I was also noticing some other places where I was spiking, um, related to sauna usage. That could be a whole nother discussion, but I was, it was a real eye opener for me. And I said, okay, well, what's going on here? Um, and, as I got more kind of insight into, the dashboard of my personal vehicle here, I was able to adopt a number of protocols based around the observation of data in my own body. And that's really the exciting thing about what you call the era of agency or the age of agency is this democratization of access to to information about your own body. You don't just have to, rely on your once a year, visit to your PCP if you even make it, et cetera. So, yeah, so, I'm happy to talk about the protocols that I adopted coming out of kind of this moment of physiological satori, um, and how it really changed my health around, if that's appropriate to
Yeah.
talk about.
Amazing. And your story is not uncommon. 93% of Americans now are metabolically unhealthy in at least one or two biomarkers. So appreciate you sharing your story. And I think starting with kind of how did it feel to see those numbers and to begin to have this insight into your own body? And then what were some of the protocols or experiments that you ran to now achieve your Prius like state, as you sometimes say?
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, initially it was a head scratcher. To be honest, I was confused, because, like I said, I was armed with plenty of information in terms of kind of nutrition, but to see, data in my own body, so it was much easier than to adopt protocols once I actually understood some of the mechanism and some of the data. So, and I guess I would just say that the weight loss was just really a byproduct of the whole process. So I don't want people to get like too caught up on the weight loss part of it. Yeah, I went from like 195 to about 145 where I am now, or like fluctuate a little bit around that. And that's feels really good for me. I'm light on my feet. I'm an athlete, and I've seen just incredible, uh, you know, performance improvement and my stamina and all sorts of the elements of my life. From focus and ability to subsume like new information, etc. But really, what I started to do is not that complicated. I started to map spikes, blood sugar spikes, to consumption of food. And I started to, make a list mentally and sometimes on a piece of paper of like, oh, whoa, I can't eat that, or that really spikes me, or that eating that, I don't know, starch or potatoes or white rice without cadencing it properly with fiber or fats on the front end had a much more dramatic spike effect or something. I basically just started to learn all of the different um, uh, physical patterns kind of in my body, and then it really adopt a protocol which was pretty much low glycemic, high fiber. I mean, I kind of think of it as ketotarian, so it's plant focused keto. So there's really three protocols that were my primary ones that really made the biggest impact. So one was the adoption of this ketotarian diet, essentially low glycemic, so keeping blood sugar down, high fiber, really like feeding the gut. So lots of salads, veggies, brassica, um, sprouts. I started sprouting a ton at home. So alfalfa sprouts, broccoli sprouts, kind of mixed bean legume sprouts, tons of olives, tons of olive oil, tons of avocados, nuts, particularly walnuts, pistachios, and some Brazil nuts. We ferment quite a bit here, um, so certainly sauerkraut. I generally break my fast, and we'll talk about fasting because that's the second protocol, but with a coconut probiotic yogurt. So that is important. And then really starting to add a lot of herbs and herbal adaptogens to my body, or to my diet. Really simple, just have a bunch around, and always go to the farmer's market and starting to get parsley and cilantro and stuff and sprinkling that into virtually everything. And then in terms of kind of quote unquote, primary protein sources, though, you can get all of your essential amino acids from a plant based diet. But for me, occasionally eating like super high quality line caught fish, salmon and tuna. So line caught, basically, they're not that big, so they don't have the same proclivity to develop a lot of heavy metal concentration. But super high quality fat, omega 3s, et cetera, and very, very good quality protein. And then maybe eggs, like a couple of times a week. And so that was really the diet, quote unquote. Now it's not a diet at all. I don't really even think about it too much. It's just a lifestyle. It's just what I go to. It's what it's in my fridge. And I really have largely eliminated, the consumption of refined sugars and refined grains and ultra processed foods. I'll put a little asterisk by that because I just went to France for 2.5 weeks. And when you get to be metabolically flexible, you have a lot more freedom to actually eat some of those things when the situation calls for it. So we can get to that at the right time. But the second
First of all, I'm coming
protocol,
over to your
yeah.
house after this to break my fast. Just listening to all of those incredible whole foods filled with so many good things for our bodies that I'm coming over after this to break my fast.
Cool. Well, yeah. So right around 10:30 or 11 every day, I will generally have a probiotic, couple scoops of this very high quality probiotic coconut yogurt, which I love, with some walnuts, um, goji berries, maybe a couple of blueberries, and some sea salt, and not very much, and that's just an amazing way to break your fast for a whole bunch of different reasons, and that leads elegantly into the fasting conversation, which is completely conjoined with the understanding of blood glucose. So, your audience is obviously going to know a lot about blood glucose already. But for me, what I realized is that over decades, I had built up insulin resistance. And I had done that through stress, through probably drinking a little bit too much from time to time, um, through diet, and through overwork and just not sleeping particularly well all the time, even though I try to adopt, good sleep hygiene. But what my challenge was to undo my insulin resistance and become more insulin sensitive, essentially reconfigure my cells such that they were more welcoming to macronutrients, whether that would be glucose or whether that would be ketones or free fatty acids for the production of energy. So, in order to do that, what I needed to do was to downregulate the production of insulin from my pancreas. So, okay, well, what's the way to do that? Well, adopt a low glycemic diet and achieve low glycemic states. So, I talked a little bit about diet already. The other protocol was for me a 16/8 intermittent fasting protocol in which I consolidated my eating window into 8 hours, generally between around 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. And no, I'm not neurotic or fundamentalist about it. You've seen me after 7 o'clock eat, probably on more than one occasion. Um, and so, but generally tried to use those goalposts to demarcate my feeding window. And of course, the result of that is in some ways the same result as the ketotarian diet that I just talked about, which essentially after 16 hours of not consuming food, your blood glucose levels are going to go way down. But your body still needs to produce energy, but in a low glycemic state, your pancreas is not going to produce insulin. It's going to produce glucagon, which is sort of the counterpart peptide hormone, which triggers all of these processes. So the release of glycogen, of stored glucose, but also a little bit of gluconeogenesis, but also really triggers what's known as lipolysis, is this process of breaking down fat adipocytes into free fatty acids and glycerin, I think, for the, but the real point is that you start to burn fat for energy. And so for me, the 16/8 protocol was tricky, was a little hard at first, but then it became almost second nature. Now, I don't think about it. Although I will say in the winter, my appetite is, I have more morning appetite than I do in the summer. It's a whole other conversation we can have about light and hormones and other things like that. But generally, the 16-8 protocol was worked really well for me. That is where the most data exists that I could find, mostly out of Sachin Panda's lab in San Diego. That's produced a lot of good data around intermittent fasting protocols, particularly the 16-8 protocol. So that was two. And of course, I was watching my CGM or my levels out throughout this whole process. And I saw my fasting glucose go from like 120 inching down over time till, 80, in the range of 80, and lower than that during sleeping hours generally. And then it kind of naturally rises with the rise of cortisol in the morning, et cetera. But it, and it also just evened out. It became waves instead of mountain ranges. And so then the last protocol I will say that is also completely intertwined with the ketotarian low glycemic diet and the 16-8 intermittent fasting protocol was I started to adopt a cold water therapy or hydrotherapy right before I would break my fast. So late morning, and this is of course, a luxury that, I generally work at home. So I have a lot of freedom with my schedule to kind of do some of these things around, my own convenient time, which I admit is a luxury. But prior to breaking my fast, so maybe 10:30 every morning, I would take a cold shower. Now, sometimes I would take a sauna on the front end of that to raise body temperature, just to make it a little easier for me. I don't love cold water, but oftentimes not. And I would just take a 60-second cold shower, and then not dry off right away, just let myself shiver. And so what was happening there? So, of course, I was engaging a particular protocol that would lower my body temperature. So most of life really is just about creating energy to be warm. There's a tremendous amount of focus in the human body just about regulating body temperature. So if you're going to purposefully lower your body temperature through cold water therapy, your cells are going to need to go into thermoneogenesis, essentially raise your body temperature back up into that Goldilocks zone, right around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And so what's going on there? Well, your mitochondria then go into overdrive and they say, we're cold, or the body is cold. We need to essentially create energy, create heat in the body. And so then it goes to burn energy. But what does it have to burn? Well, it doesn't really have any glucose around because A, you've adopted a low glycemic diet, but B, you're in a fasted state. So what does it have to burn? Stored fat. And this is really where I almost could physically see the fat coming off in the mirror, would be like during this process of hydrotherapy before I break the fast. And it was those three protocols conjoined that really kind of set me off kind of on my way to a more optimal health.
Incredible. Ketotarian diet, intermittent fasting, and cold exposure, three phenomenal protocols. I would love to jump back to intermittent fasting for a moment because I think this is a technique that many Levels members, many people of our audience, try to do or have adopted or enjoy, but you have a very unique philosophical view of intermittent fasting. In one of your musings, you say you had a craving not to crave, and the cessation of craving is a stepping stone to nirvana and to liberation. And when I read that, it's like, wow, that really resonates with me. Is myself and many people are, crave sugar. You're addicted to sugar. And so how does this sort of philosophical perspective of craving not to crave, how did that come into play in your intermittent fasting and your metabolic health journey?
Yeah, well, there is obviously a lot of physiological mechanisms at play with fasting. And then there's a whole number of psychological, or what you might even categorize as spiritual components to fasting. So clearly this has been baked into religions, Christ's 40 days in the desert um, was an exercise in fasting and living ascetically. I believe Muhammad actually received the Quran from Saint Gabriel in a fasted state, though that might be apocryphal, but I'll go with it for now. But particularly Buddhism talks a lot about fasting, and baked into Siddhartha's primary thesis is that we suffer because we crave, and that we are always um, looking for external agents to assuage internal discontents or perceived deficiencies. So that could be sugar, that could be alcohol, that could be cigarettes, that could be gambling, that could be sex or pornography, that could be the approval of others. Essentially anything that you're looking for outside of yourself to bolster your own sense of satisfaction or self-esteem or self-acceptance. So, and then of course, the way out of suffering is to blow out, like nirvana. Literally, the translation of it is to blow out. So it's literally to let go, to stop craving, to stop clinging, to stop forcing, um, and to stop pursuing kind of what I refer to as kind of the hedonic treadmill, which tells you that, if only and only if I can achieve this thing or buy that fancy car or house or, get this girlfriend or boyfriend, well, then and only then I'll be happy. And so, you know, there always is a gap there between who we are and where we are and our happiness, which sort of looms out there on the horizon somewhere. And the moment that we cut the ribbon off that box when we get it or achieve it, our eyes then refocus on some other new glittering object on the horizon. And that is the hedonic treadmill. That is um, the the chakra, if you will, of craving, this endless cycle that so many of us are on. And I'm certainly not, I'm not out of that cycle myself. But I think being able to witness and observe craving that would well up inside me related to food was, served as a bit of an inflection point for my overall relationship with need or craving. And because certainly I have a biological imperative, I have a biological need for food to create energy. Yes, that is true. But when is that the case versus a psychological desire for pleasure with food? And really being able to feel that sense of ghrelin, that sense of hunger, um, arise within me, and then witness its provenance, basically. Was it coming from a biological need, or was it coming from some sort of psychological need for comfort or pleasure? And the more I could actually train myself to witness that feeling, the more I could delineate between the two and say, okay, actually now I really need to go get like a handful of walnuts or something because I'm feeling low. I need some energy. Oh, but actually now this is just mindlessness. This is just me, you know, out of habit reaching for something in the cupboard, etc. And and over time, I really got to actually look forward almost to that feeling of craving, to be able to witness it, to name it, and just to say, no, I don't have to fall prey to every desire. And it's a training that can have its origin around food, but that has very wide application. Because if I can manage my cravings as it pertains to food? Well, can I manage my cravings as it pertains to my phone, or like Instagram or whatever, or any other transgression or peccadillo that, I may have? And there are many. So, I really look at fasting as much as a spiritual experience as much as it is a physiological experience.
Incredible. That is a phenomenal example of agency right there. What were some of the tools or techniques, whether it's meditation or gratitude practice, you used as you were in the process of sort of training your mind to observe what was happening both in your mind and in your body?
Yeah, there's a couple just specific techniques that relate to meditation techniques. And before I tell you what they are, I will say that, there's a lot of clinical data that shows that one of the best correlations for self-reported well-being or self-reported happiness is correlated with aligning your thoughts with your actions, essentially yoking your intention and what you're thinking about, what's going on in your head, with what you're actually doing. So there is real clinical research to point to the fact that a wandering mind is a very unhappy mind. And of course, we have every opportunity in the attention economy to be distracted because every single marketer, friend, family member, spammer, whatever, is vying for your conscious attention at every possible moment. So it's very, very easy to become distracted, essentially cleave what you're thinking about with actually what you're doing. And even if you're thinking about something fantastic, if there is a gap or a separation between your intention and your thoughts and your actions, it has been proven to show that that creates quite a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction. So one of the great targets of meditation is to essentially align yourself in the present moment with what you are actually doing. And there's a couple different ways of doing that. I mean, one is, focused concentration, dhyana in Sanskrit, or chan in Chinese, or Zen in Japanese. So people may be familiar with those traditions, where you find what's known as a drishti. Now that tends to mean like a gaze point, and you focus your complete concentration on that gaze point. But that drishti could also be your breath. It also could be a mantra. It could also be some mala beads that you're, um, you know, threading through your fingers. It's essentially finding one pointedness of mind, such that you are absolutely concentrated and focused on the thing that you're doing. And know that thoughts, of course, will come in and out of consciousness, and feelings of discomfort and all that stuff. And that's actually a good thing. That is actually an opportunity to always come back to your drishti or your mantra. And it has been shown that happiness is really very much linked or concomitant with people's ability not just to hold their focus, but to actually leave and then come back. And what is that duration period of actually coming back to focus? And people who meditate a lot train themselves to be able to always come back, always come back, always come back. And that is a big indicator for our happiness, as I said. Now, the other one is, I described it to some degree as part of the direct experience of observing craving. But essentially, it is the practice of observing phenomena arising and subsiding in consciousness moment to moment without fixating on it or identifying with it. So you can start with sound, because sound you generally don't associate like a valence or too much salience with it. It's kind of morally neutral. You're not judging the car going by. I mean, you might if it doesn't have a proper muffler or something. But, or the bird tweeting or, the HVAC system or your refrigerator humming. Essentially, you just become extremely, extremely quiet and just observe sound as phenomena appearing and disappearing in consciousness moment to moment. You didn't put it there. It just came and it went, and you waved at it and said goodbye. Nice knowing you. And that practice is transferable to emotions and feelings. That emotions and feelings in this sense are like the phenomenon of sound. They appear and they disappear within your field of awareness. They are completely transitory. You didn't put them there. They just welled up somewhere from under the crust of consciousness, and they, again, disappeared. And so don't fixate on them. Don't identify with them. You can't be jealous. You can't be jealous. You can feel a wave of jealousy. You can feel a wave of envy or any emotion. But these, again, are transitory phenomena, and they're just coming and going. And so these are, two pretty simple, basic kinds of practices that help to align your thoughts with your actions and really truly bring you into the present moment. Because you can't really be grateful without presence. Because gratitude is reliant on a certain kind of thankfulness for the miracle of God's gifts. But if you are stuck in the projecting your needs out into the future, back into that kind of hedonic treadmill kind of situation, then you're always out there. You're always in Tomorrowland. But the sad reality is tomorrow never comes. It's always a projection. And, so much of the time we're focused on the traumas of our past and projecting them into the future as anticipated memories, anticipated negative memories oftentimes. And so we're creating memories in the future that are completely phantoms of our own projection, completely phantoms. And this is the cause of a tremendous amount of anxiety and suffering. And then we become anxious about the anxiety. And then we become anxious about the anxiousness that we feel about the anxiety. But, the witness of the anxiety is fine. The witness is just watching it. And that's really, I think to the degree that meditation has to have a goal. And I don't always like to give it a goal because mostly it's really just about grooving with the present, and the benefits become sort of self-evident as part of the practice. But to the degree there is a goal, one of them could be the relief of a lot of anxiety by moving ourselves into the reality of the ever now and out of the imagination of the future and the tyranny of the past.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. One of the things I hear you have clearly cultivated through your meditation practice is just this deep sense of gratitude for food, for the natural world. You talk about gratitude for things as simple as green beans, how beautiful a long string green bean is. How does that sense of gratitude kind of impact how you view food? When you're going into your fridge, when you're making a meal, how does that sense of gratitude sort of carry through to your relationship with food?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is would be a slightly kind of spiritual answer to that question, but Sonia, I would advise everyone to give up on trying to answer the question why we are here. Um, I mean, it's a noble pursuit, but just, go to Barnes and Nobles and you'll see 20,000 books in religion and 20,000 books in New Age. And it's an open question. It hasn't been determined. But for me, a lot of the answers to why we are here um, begin to become clear when you examine how we are here. And the metaphysical is so often patterned in the physical as nature's cosmic foundational intelligence. And so when we examine a green bean or an apple or a pear or, any luscious fruit or crispy, vegetable, to actually understand how that particular life form came to be. Well, I mean, the only appropriate response to that would be a sense of wonder and awe and gratitude. And, there's a lot of in the news right now about fusion, right? So we've been working on this. Humanity's been working on this project for decades. Um, and of course, the primary fusion reaction that exists in the universe happens, you know, billions and trillions of times per second in the sun. And, this is the source of everything that animates uh, all life, including human existence. But the process of two hydrogen nuclei fusing, to create a helium atom, and as part of that, the release of electromagnetic radiation as a quanta, and this photon hurtles through interstellar space into our atmosphere and happens to find a chloroplast in the leaf of a string bean plant or an apple tree, and that chloroplast actually has its origin as a bacteria 2 billion years ago that merged with an archaea that became eventually mitochondria in human life, and that became a chloroplast in plant life. And the reaction of that photon on that leaf, triggers this process of photosynthesis in which, water and carbon dioxide are essentially then um, metabolized into chemical energy out of solar energy. And in combination with the genomics of that particular plant, whether that's an apple tree, for example, creates this juicy fruit that hangs very conveniently right about shoulder height for us to kind of, pick. And then you move into this process of human metabolism and human digestion, which is really the unlocking of the sun's energy inside of your body, uh, such that you know you are animated, and that your intentions and your emotions uh, can express themselves through your motor neurons or through neurotransmitters that get built through the production of energy that then are animated to make you feel a particular way and when you begin to dissect all of these processes and know that all of these systems are also just produced from self-assembled atoms that were part of a massive star explosion billions of years ago. I mean, it's the only appropriate response is gratitude. I mean, how is this improbable, unlikely miracle possible? And this is kind of for people that are curious. You can keep studying these patterns of existence, and it can invoke really just a lot of wonder and a lot of awe and a lot of gratitude. So when you then sit down at the dinner table to eat your string beans or whatever, and know that you are in this co-evolved relationship that leverages billions of years of cosmic intelligence, into that moment, such that like this energy is then being transferred from the sun to the plant to you, and then back out as carbon dioxide and water and all of the energy that then you produce. It's amazing.
I'm never going to look at a green bean the same way again. I love that description so much. That's truly beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to transition us from green beans back to French croissants. So another thing we can have a sense of awe and wonder around. But you mentioned earlier in the episode, recent trip to France and the sort of metabolic flexibility that you experience when you're maybe eating things outside of what you would have at home. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more around what that metabolic flexibility looks like and feels like for you when you're outside of your normal routine.
Yeah. So for me, it's a little easier right now because my metabolic vehicle here is pretty tuned up after a year of protocols. So let me rephrase, 'cause I don't like I have, because it's not a product, it's a process. But I'm currently in the experience of metabolic flexibility, which is essentially a certain capacity to switch relatively seamlessly between burning fat and burning carbohydrates or glucose for energy. Um, so, having achieved that metabolic flexibility, which is really also representative of like an upgrade of mitochondrial function, really. And, we didn't talk about fasting and mitochondria, but there is an incredible relationship between intermittent fasting and mitophagy, which is essentially autophagy for mitochondria, the breaking down of dysfunctional mitochondria, but also mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, which of course everyone knows as the energy power plants in your cells. They also do a whole lot more than just produce energy, but that's for the purposes of this conversation. Let's focus there. And so, it's fair to say that, my mitochondria are functioning at like an efficient clip at this juncture. So then when I go to visit my firstborn, who has uh, tortured me by restationing herself in the City of Lights, but also given me ample excuse to visit her more than she even wants to be visited at this juncture. Um, so I was just there for 2.5 weeks, and, parked in a funky little Airbnb with basically no kitchen. Um, and then you're in Paris. So you want to, we're walking to the Musée d'Orsay and the Picasso Museum and the Louvre, and then we're going out to jazz at night. And we're doing, all of these different things. We're out in the world. I don't really have a kitchen. So that means, despite the fact that the French have all these great markets and all this kind of stuff, you know, I was eating out pretty much every single meal for 2.5 weeks. And so the wonderful thing about getting metabolically flexible is that you can, if you get to that place, then you can actually, I would say, just be more liberal and cheat a little bit around the edges and just be okay, because your body has upgraded its functionality. But I will also say that there were things that I did there to keep myself on some form of protocol. Like, it was pretty easy for me to maintain my fasting protocol there. So, and largely, and I would say that this could be applied not just to travel, but to holiday season, is like I would just basically eat one big meal a day. We would go out and when I was in France, anyways, we would go out for these like fantastic dinners, and we'd all like hang out around the table, and we'd be there for hours, and all that kind of stuff. And during the day, I was, to be honest, pretty espresso fueled, but drinking a ton of water, staying super, super hydrated. I had all my kind of supplement regime and all that kind of stuff. But really trying to kind of concentrate those like big, heavy meals, just like one per day. And then always walking and getting some form of exercise postprandially, so after eating, which is a amazing way to control glucose spikes. So, one of the cool, convenient things about holiday season is sometimes, you're cooking all day in the kitchen, but you can maybe just eat one big meal around 4 or 5 in the evening. And, you're just hanging out around the table forever. But that's really kind of like all you're really eating for that day. And so, you know, there's certain ways to manage it, and also have fun and don't be too crazy and neurotic and fundamentalist about it. And just know that, like, this is a particular time of year where people get to commune around the table and be with friends and be with family and just make the absolute um, most of it. Um, I guess the one other thing I would say is that I've really tried to develop some kind of mindful practice before eating. And part of that is gratitude, reflecting on like the wondrous journey of the string bean. But, we have a ritual in our house. It's called Rosebud Thorn, that
I
before and
love
as we
rosebud
start
thorn. You're
eating.
speaking my language, Jeff.
Okay, see, not very many people know about Rosebud Thorn, but I'm slowly spreading the gospel around it. But, so much of the time in modern culture, the way that we're eating is extremely rushed. And so, it's often said, you are what you eat. But really, a more precise axiom there would be you are what your body can absorb. And if you are consuming food while you're driving, or while you're staring at your phone, or while you're watching a thriller or a horror movie, or, you know, in any form of distracted state where you might be in your sympathetic nervous system, or, you might be getting triggered in some way. Well, what's happening there, just physiologically? Well, all of your energy is being diverted from your gut and from your immune system to your extremities, to your muscles. Your heart rate and your respiratory rate are going up. Your pupils are dilating, sometimes depending. And essentially, all of the energy allocation is moving away from digestion and metabolism. So, what you really want to do before you eat and consume food is you want to move yourself out of that sympathetic nervous system, out of that cortisol infused, amygdala hijacked state of being, into your parasympathetic rest and digest state. And you can do that, through breath work, through prayer, through a gratitude practice, or if you want, we have Rosebud Thorn, which is the ritual that we engage in around the table, where I have 3 daughters, and we go around the table, and we share our rose, which is kind of the best part of our day, our thorn, which is uh, clearly the thorniest part of the day, and then our bud, something that might represent some potential for the future, although don't get too caught up on the future. And it's just a wonderful way to engage in conversation, for me to learn about what's up in my kids' life, for them to pretend to care about what's up in my life, and it really just brings us down into this grounding place. And there's a beautiful emotional side to that. But there's also some physiological impacts there, which is then, you are in a better place to digest and absorb as much possible nutrients from your food by pulling yourself back into that grounded place. So there's a lot of different things inside of there that I would recommend that people do specifically around this season, but also in general.
I love it. Rosebud thorn is one of my favorites. I'm notorious for having my friends and family play, and I've actually recently added an addendum so you can see what you think of this. It's rosebud thorn chow. So a chow is either something you're really looking forward to eating if you're doing it before dinner, like I'm so excited for these mashed sweet potatoes that we're going to have, or if it's at the end of a weekend, it's like, what was the most incredible thing that we enjoyed? And that ends up being one of the most fun parts of the game. So if you're open to adding an addendum, it's rosebud thorn
Okay.
chow.
All right. I'll introduce it and I'll report back and see how much traction I get. Oftentimes we don't even oftentimes, we get we digress, and we don't really make it through all of the requisite categories. But that's part of the fun, and part of the process is that you discover something new about a friend or a loved one that you might not otherwise have known about. It's very sweet
Totally.
practice.
The best part about the game is that if it lasts like 3 to 4 hours and you realize you still haven't answered all of the rosebud thorn questions. I love it.
Yeah, we do this at Commune Topanga quite a bit, and we have some really pretty interesting people that are coming through there on the regular, and so pretty recently we got to do Rosebud Thorn with Gabor Mate. It was really funny, and just to see like everybody has like a rosebud and a thorn. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're an internationally renowned author or celebrity. Everybody has a rosebud thorn. So.
Great point. That sort of leads me to another question. You have spent your life, spreading education and amplifying thoughts of incredible doctors and authors and thought leaders through your work with Commune, especially. Have there been any kind of learnings from those conversations around well-being and behavior change that have really changed the trajectory of your personal health journey?
Yes. I think it's really after interviewing 400 people for the podcast, writing 2,000 words a week for 3 years, making 125 courses, sitting around the table, hiking, taking saunas, cold baths with dozens upon dozens upon dozens of the world's most brilliant people and authors and teachers and thought leaders and sages and mystics of all sorts. I've been so lucky because I can just be a sponge and absorb and grow my own breadth of knowledge. And if I can synthesize that into wisdom, great. But from, the brilliance of other people, and then synthesize that into something that is my own. And so through all of these hundreds and hundreds of conversations, what I began to notice were certain patterns, or I would say kind of a consilience across all of these different people that I've talked to. And as you say, I mean, they could be microbiologists or virologists, they could be spiritual leaders or monks or whatever, all across the map. But I think one of the themes that has come up over and over and over again is that all phenomena that arise as a product of consciousness arise as a coincidence of opposites. So for sleep, there is wakefulness. For up, there is down. For beloved, there's a lover. For there's sun, there's moon. There's the sunny side of the mountain, has to have the shady side of the mountain. The heads goes with tails. Everything goes with something else. And nature's foundational intelligence brings polarities into a sensitive kind of balance, like a dissonant harmony or a kind of an asymmetrical order. I think about it in terms of love, for example, where love requires a lover and a beloved, and those roles might switch back and forth a bit. But the healthy relationship is like a teeter-totter where neither people's feet are touching the ground. And you can apply that same theory, if you will, to almost every phenomena that exists with, or every relationship that exists within the natural world. So you have, your respiratory system and and your cellular respiration essentially is an exchange of oxygen for carbon dioxide. You have glucagon and insulin, as we discussed earlier. You have growth pathways like mammalian target of rapamycin, and then you have repair and autophagy pathways like AMPK. You have neurotransmitters that are inhibitory like GABA and serotonin. You have neurotransmitters that are excitatory like dopamine and norepinephrine and adrenaline, hormones like that too. you have everywhere that you look. Electricity is essentially the repulsion and attraction of negatively and positively charged particles. Um, I could go on essentially forever about like homeostatic drive and sleep and wakefulness and cortisol and melatonin and antioxidants and free radicals, and like everywhere that you look within human physiology, within the natural world, within plant life, what you have is the coincidence of opposites, and you have this intelligence that is foundational, that is attempting to bring those opposites into some form of coherence. And that is what it's like to be alive, is finding that eubiosis, that sense of sensitive balance or sensitive order, which is never a thing, it's never a product, it's always a process. And every interaction that you have as an organism um, with your environment is either adaptive, so it's bringing things into greater balance, or maladaptive, pushing things to their polarities. And so when you begin to sort of approach life with that overarching philosophy, you get to see that healthy life, that thriving, flourishing life, is clumpy, it's bushy, it like clusters to the middle. And you can see that in healthy physiological systems that have like high concentrations of both oxygen and carbon dioxide, or a healthy balance between neurotransmitters, or cortisol releasing at the right time of day and melatonin releasing at the right time of day, or like all the different balances, the right release of glucagon, the right release of insulin, all of these kinds of things. But you can also start to map it on social and cultural phenomenon. It's like, it's not healthy to have 3 men in the United States that own more collective wealth than the bottom 50% of the population combined, right? It's not healthy to have 100 billion cows, sheep, chickens, pigs, and people, and then have extinction of species on the other side. Same with biodiversity of plant life. It's not healthy to have downtown main streets shuttered up, and little jazz stations and local newspapers and local markets all going out of business, and then have one big Walmart on the edge of town that only provides people with ultra processed foods and cheap goods. And I mean, and you can go on and on and on. Essentially, healthy systems are ones that take polarities and balance them and move things to the middle, and unhealthy systems are flat and move things to the edges. And so when you see the world and the universe becoming flatter and flatter, that is a sign that we're headed, towards some sort of significant calamity. I mean, I don't want to over dramatize it with like the sixth great extinction, though I could make a case for that for sure. So, when I talk about, kind of pulling that particular thread through the needle, this is my own synthesis of having hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of conversations with different people talking about this phenomenon in their own, field of expertise. So whether that's a neuroscientist talking about, neurochemicals or neuromodulators in the brain, or whether that's a regenerative farmer talking about the healthy balance of microbial life in the soil, it's all pointing to the same thing. And of course, the Chinese knew this thousands upon thousands of years ago, because they developed the symbol that encapsulates this, which is the yin yang. It's the balance between the light and the dark, and originally the sunny side of the mountain and the shady side of the mountain. But of course, there's a little bit of shade on the sunny side, and there's a little bit of sun on the shady side. And all of this is existing as ons and offs and crests and troughs, and those patterns are everywhere in the material world. In hydraulics, you see waves of, water. They go like this, they go up and they down, they have an amplitude and a frequency. In electromagnetic waves, same thing. All of these crests and troughs, ups and downs, ons and offs, can be tracked through virtually every natural phenomenon. And, to the degree that we want to live happy and flourishing lives, the best we can do is study the patterns of nature and try to align ourselves with them such that we're kind of applying the rudder within nature's current. And that's a process.
What a gift, Jeff, to have you synthesize that learning, those money learnings from 400 plus people. Truly, such wisdom that you've imparted. So thank you. Truly such a gift.
Well, you're just squeezing the sponge. That's it. By nature of what I do, I'm a plagiarist. I'm a synthesizer plagiarist. It's just really just taking everybody else's ideas and trying to find some common links to them.
Amazing. Well, to close us off, I'm going to ask 3 shorter questions and sort of a rapid fire type of thing. But the first one is, what is your number 1 most metabolically healthy favorite food?
I have to go with avocados because I can eat avocados all day long. So I'm sticking with avocados.
I love it. In one sentence or a phrase, what does health mean to you?
Well, health is a process of healing, of moving toward wholeness.
And what is one thing you are optimistic about with regards to solving our country's metabolic health crisis?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. Really, the democratization of information and tools that give individuals more agency and empowerment over their own health. And that is a really exciting development. And obviously, you are playing a significant part of that. But there are many others as well. And I think that human curiosity around their own people's own physiology has only grown. And that might be one of the few silver linings in the alpenglow of COVID. I think the other piece is that we seem to be taking regenerative farming and soil health more seriously as a culture. And I think this has become, a sort of a bipartisan issue. And there's not many of those because nutrient-dense foods are completely and 100% reliant on nutrient-dense soil. And that message seems to be getting out there and seems to be resonating with more and more people. And I'm very hopeful about that.
Well, I wish we could do a whole other hour on regenerative agriculture. Maybe that'll have to be a future episode. Thank you so much, Jeff. Where can listeners find more from you and join your community?
Yeah, well, I just encourage everyone to go to the Commune platform at onecommune.com. We have 120 courses up there with brilliant people, thought leaders that will provide you with a lot of information about how to live healthier and happier life and the protocols to adopt too. So we can really pair both mechanism and protocol on that platform. And then if you're interested in listening to my podcast, it's just called the Commune Podcast. And it's on all the different podcatchers. And I'm exhorting both pathetically and poetically on Instagram from time to time at Jeff Krasno. So you can see me there.